Imagine yourself as an old person, and you sit at your house all alone without a family or friends. But there's one thing that you do enjoy. You enjoy a bay window. Now, this bay window is beautiful and magnificent, and it's massive, and you see your past and present and possibly even your future through it. You see your friends and a previous generation falling in the woods or in the grass. And you think about, who you were. Now, just imagine this, just a little tiny crack appears. You don't think much of it, of course. You say, what's the big deal? It's just a small crack. But eventually water gets in it. And as we all know, water expands when it gets cold. And it eventually creates a massive crack. Now you can't enjoy that bay window. You lose the thing that you enjoy most in your life. Now, this can be an effective antidote to explain the fact that we're going to talk about. To what extent and why did the United States adopt an isolationist policy in the 1920s and 1930s? The first point that we're going to be making is how World War I affected this policy. I mean, the lost generation. Isn't that enough to think about? A lot of things happened that created this kind of policy that influenced America and influenced the entire world. The next point that we're going to be talking about is the harsh immigration policies that came before World War I. A lot of inferior races and inferior countries came to America, and America wanted to limit the immigration. And the third point that we're going to be making is specifically about the Great Depression and how it changed a lot of ideologies in America and how family life moved from more of an agricultural perspective to more of an in-life, in-home, in-goods kind of perspective. And all of these points helped influence the policy that America created in the 1920s and 1930s. On to our first point about World War I.
Now, the effects of World War I led to the United States creating extreme isolationist policies in the 1920s and 1930s. The American public no longer wanted to be involved in foreign affairs, specifically European affairs, because of what happened with World War I. This led to the rejection of the League of Nations by America because they believed that it could possibly be a military alliance with Europe. And this also led to the Neutrality Acts in the mid-1930s, keeping the United States out of foreign conflict by outlawing the sale of arms to countries in war, both civil and against other people.
Yeah, overall, the World War I had a lot of impacts throughout America. Not solely just in America. A lot of countries wanted to kind of take this isolationist policy and apply it to their country. A lot of countries use this, kind of policy to try to limit, like we're going to make in our second point, the immigration and how, quote-unquote inferior countries eventually moved on to America. So the second point is I'm going to be making is about immigration policy. We passed a act called the Emergency Quota Act. Okay, it temporarily limited the amount of immigrants that were coming from other countries into America. Now, they used this based on the 1890 census, which basically what they did, let's say you had 100 people coming to America from Ireland, hypothetically. It would take 3% of that, so 3 people, and it would allot 3 people to come to America. Now, in 1890, 100 people were coming to America from Ireland, and they limited that to about 3%. I mean, that obviously shows a very direct correlation between how, what kind of policies were implemented in this time period, okay? The bill favored more American immigrants from Northern Europeans, specifically England, and restricted a wave of new immigration from immigrants. Now, I made a joke earlier about Don Corleone and how he came to America during this time, as we all know from The Godfather. That's because a lot of Italian and Spain immigrants came during this time period. Also, the bill was revised later in the Immigration Act of 1924, and it reduced the number of immigrants to 2%. That came from 3% to 2% a year. That is insane, and it obviously shows that America adopted an isolation
The bill also
policy during the 1920s.
Before you go on, the bill also began targeting specific groups of people such as Jews, East Asians, and Indians.
Exactly. So it obviously shows that America adopted these kind of policies. On to our next point, third point.
So our third and final point is that the Great Depression led to many Americans to begin to adopt isolationist policies because they wanted to pay more attention to the issues at home. The stock markets collapsed in 1929, causing one of the worst economic crises in the Western world. Americans began to focus more inward, more home, more about me. They were more worried about if the soup kitchen down the street was going to be open the next week, rather than if Adolf Hitler was busy trying to take over Europe.
Overall, these points, World War I, how the United States adopted a harsher immigration policy, and how the Great Depression affected America, all overall encompass American ideology about their isolationist policy in the 1920s and 1930s. Like we said about the First World War and how we created like a neutrality act and we wanted to we didn't want to participate in the League of Nations. That's obviously a great example of how we wanted to isolate ourselves. In the second point, how I talked about how we adopted a harsher immigration policy and how we weren't letting as many immigrants come in. And a lot of people are familiar with this through like Ellis Island and how like the harsh treatment of immigrants that came throughout this time. And our last point about the Great Depression and how a lot more people wanted to focus more about themselves and about the family and about the home than really focusing about the overall issues encompassing the entire world. Have anything else to say, Connor?
Nope, just that. Yeah, that was great. Woo!
Isolationists. Oh God! Woo! 1920s, 1930s.
Yeah.
Those policies were awful.